The music stopped abruptly, and I watched my fiancée Emma laugh as Marcus dipped her low, his hand confidently supporting her back. They'd been practicing for 3 hours straight, and I'd been sitting in the corner of our living room the entire shade, time supposedly helping by operating the Bluetooth speaker. What I was really doing was watching the woman I'd planned to marry in 6 months flirt shamelessly with her dance instructor while treating me like I was invisible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jake, can you replay that last song? Emma called out without even looking in my direction. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly messy, and she had that sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Marcus adjusted his fitted black t-shirt and grinned at her with the kind of confidence I'd never possessed. Sure thing, I mumbled, rewinding to the beginning of their wedding song for what felt like the 100th time. Our wedding song. The one we'd chosen together during what I thought was a romantic evening last winter, when Emma still seemed excited about marrying me. That was 6 months ago, back when Emma would curl up next to me on this same couch and talk about our future together. Back when she'd run her fingers through my hair while we watched Netflix, or text me random inside jokes during my boring days at the accounting firm. She barely looked up from her phone when I got home from work, and conversations about the wedding had become cold. Transactional discussions about seating charts and vendor payments. The whole Marcus situation had started innocently enough 3 weeks earlier. Emma had come home from her marketing job at the tech startup looking frustrated, tossing her designer purse onto the kitchen counter with more force than necessary. The wedding coordinator wants us to have our first dance choreographed, she'd announced, not bothering with her usual greeting. Apparently half the couples at the venue do some elaborate routine now, and she thinks we should too if we want our reception to feel modern and memorable. I'd looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing quarterly reports for a client. Choreographed. Emma, you know I can barely manage a slow sway without stepping on your feet. Remember your cousin's wedding last year? She'd rolled her eyes, that particular expression becoming increasingly common whenever I reminded her of my limitations. That's exactly the problem, Jake. Patricia's friends are all going to be there. And you know how judgmental they can be? The last thing I need is for my mother's social circle to think I'm marrying someone who can't even dance properly at his own wedding. Patricia, Emma's mother, had never been my biggest fan. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she thought Emma could do better than a junior accountant from a middle-class family. The woman had a way of looking at me like I was a stain on her daughter's otherwise perfect life trajectory. Emma used to defend me against her mother's subtle criticisms, but lately, she'd just gone quiet whenever Patricia made one of her pointed comments about my career prospects or my casual approach to social events. So what are you suggesting? I'd asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Dance lessons. Professional ones. The wedding's in 6 months, so we have time to learn something actually impressive. I'd agreed, of course. At that point, I was still operating under the delusion that this was something we'd do together, something that might even bring us closer. I'd imagined us laughing through clumsy attempts at spins and dips, maybe grabbing dinner afterward and talking about how ridiculous we looked but how much fun we were having. That fantasy died the moment Emma walked into Rhythm and Soul Dance Academy with Marcus instead of me. I found us an instructor, she'd announced that Friday evening, her voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard in months. His name is Marcus, and he specializes in wedding choreography. He's actually a personal trainer too, so he really understands how to work with different body types and skill levels. The way she said different body types while glancing at my soft midsection made my stomach clench. I'd put on weight over the past year, stress-eating my way through long days at work and Emma's increasing emotional distance. Marcus, as I discovered when he showed up at our apartment that first evening, looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Men's Fitness magazine. Broad shoulders, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of easy confidence that made people gravitate toward him instantly. You must be Jake, he'd said, extending a hand with a grip that made my fingers ache. Emma's told me so much about you. What exactly had she told him? I'd wondered but didn't ask. Instead, I'd watched as Emma transformed in Marcus's presence, becoming animated and flirtatious in a way that reminded me of how she used to act during our early dating days. She laughed at his jokes, complimented his teaching style, and seemed to hang on his every word about proper posture and movement. The thing about partner dancing, Marcus had explained that first night, positioning Emma in what he called the frame, is that it's all about trust and connection. The lead has to be confident and decisive, and the follow has to be willing to surrender control completely. I'd noticed how his hands lingered on Emma's waist as he demonstrated the basic position, how she bit her lower lip in concentration as he guided her through simple steps. There was an intimacy to their interaction. That made me feel like an intruder in my own living room. "Jake, why don't you try leading Emma through this sequence?" Marcus had suggested after showing her a turn combination. I'd stepped forward awkwardly, trying to mimic his confident posture and firm grip. But where Marcus moved with fluid grace, I felt clunky and uncertain. Emma had grown tense in my arms, anticipating my mistakes before I made them. "Relax your shoulders," she'd muttered under her breath. "You're too stiff." "Maybe we should have Jake observe for now," Marcus had interjected smoothly. "Sometimes it's helpful to watch the technique before jumping in." And just like that, I'd been relegated to the sidelines of my own wedding dance preparation. Marcus took the lead role, while I became the designated music operator and water bottle fetcher. Emma didn't protest this arrangement. In fact, she seemed relieved. Over the following weeks, their practice sessions became the highlight of Emma's week. She'd rush home from work on dance nights, shower, and change into form-fitting workout clothes that accentuated her figure. She'd style her hair and apply makeup with a care she no longer took for our date nights, which had become increasingly rare anyway. "Marcus says, I'm a natural," she'd mentioned casually one evening as she stretched on our living room rug after a particularly intense session. "I thinks with the right partner, I could probably compete in amateur ballroom competitions." The implication was clear. It was not the right partner. I'd started dreading Tuesdays and Thursdays, the nights Marcus came over to transform our living room into a dance studio. I'd make excuses to work late or run errands, but Emma always insisted I'd be there to help. Really, I think she wanted an audience for the growing chemistry between her and her instructor. It was during their 4th week of lessons that I finally understood what was really happening. I'd been in the kitchen getting myself a beer when I heard Emma's voice drift from the living room. "I keep thinking about what you said last week," she was saying, slightly breathless from their recent routine, "about finding the right partner for competition." "You have natural grace," Marcus replied, his voice lower than usual. "Some people spend years trying to develop the kind of connection you have with music and movement. It's rare." There was a pause, filled only by the soft background music still playing from the speaker. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like." Emma continued to dance with someone who really understood the art form. Someone who could match my energy instead of holding me back. My hand tightened around the beer bottle. She was talking about me, about how I was holding her back. "You deserve a partner who can challenge you," Marcus said. When I returned to the living room, they were standing closer than any dance position required, Emma's hand resting on Marcus's chest as they talked in hushed tones. They sprang apart when they saw me, but the damage was done. I'd seen the way. They looked at each other, the kind of charged atmosphere that had nothing to do with wedding preparation and everything to do with two people fighting an attraction they were losing the battle against. That night, after Marcus left, I'd tried to talk to Emma about what I'd witnessed. "Are you serious right now?" she'd snapped, when I suggested that maybe their relationship was becoming inappropriate. "Marcus is a professional instructor. Because you're insecure about your own dancing abilities doesn't mean you get to project that onto my lessons." "Emma, I saw how you two were looking at each other. You saw nothing because there's nothing to see." "God, Jake, this is exactly why I need someone like Marcus. You're so focused on your own inadequacies that you can't even support me in trying to make our wedding special." She'd stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room where the scent of Marcus's cologne still lingered in the air. I'd stood there, surrounded by the furniture we'd bought together and the pictures of our supposedly happy relationship, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The next morning, Emma had apologized for her harsh words, but her explanation had somehow made things worse. "I'm sorry I snapped at you," she'd said over coffee, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's just that these dance lessons are really important to me. For the first time in months, I feel confident and beautiful and graceful. Marcus makes me feel like I'm capable of more than I thought possible. What she didn't say, but what hung heavy in the air between us was that I had never made her feel any of those things. I made her feel ordinary, safe, and apparently insufficient. Now, watching them practice their elaborate routine for what felt like the 1,000th time, I realized that I'd become a spectator in my own engagement. Emma moved with a fluidity and joy that I'd never inspired in her, responding to Marcus's lead with an eagerness that she'd never shown toward any of my suggestions or plans. "That was perfect," Kus exclaimed as the song ended, spinning Emma out and pulling her back into his arms. "You've really mastered that combination." Emma beamed up at him, her face glowing with accomplishment and something deeper that made my chest tight with a mixture of jealousy and recognition. She was falling for him if she hadn't already. And judging by the way Marcus's hands lingered on her waist and the intensity of his gaze when he looked at her, the feeling was mutual. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I cleared my throat from my corner chair. "That looked great, you too, really smooth." They both turned to me with expressions that suggested they'd forgotten I was there entirely. Emma's smile faltered slightly, as if my presence had broken some kind of spell. "Thanks," she said, stepping away from Marcus, but not as quickly as she should have. "I think we're getting close to having it perfect for the wedding. Our wedding. It's the wedding where she'd dance with Marcus in front of all our friends and family, showcasing a connection and chemistry that everyone would be able to see, including me, including Patricia, who would probably be thrilled to see her daughter with someone who could actually lead her properly." As Marcus packed up his things and prepared to leave, making plans for their next session, I made a decision. I couldn't keep sitting in this chair operating their soundtrack while watching my fiancé fall in love with another man. Something had to change, and since Emma clearly wasn't going to be the one to address what was happening, it would have to be me. I just had no idea yet what that something would be or how dramatically it would change the course of all our lives. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came 3 days later, but not in the way I'd expected. I'd planned to have a calm, rational conversation with Emma about boundaries and the inappropriate direction her dance lessons had taken. Instead, I walked into our apartment after work to find her sitting on the couch with her phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, Marcus," she was saying, her voice thick with emotion. "But this is so sudden. Can't we work something out?" I froze in the doorway, grocery bags still in my hands, listening to my fiancé plead with another man in a tone I'd never heard her use with me. There was desperation there, vulnerability, and something that sounded dangerously close to heartbreak. "What do you mean you're taking the position in Seattle?" Emma continued, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "What about our sessions? What about the wedding routine?" "Seattle." Marcus was moving to Seattle. The relief that flooded through me was so intense, I nearly dropped the groceries. Maybe this nightmare would end naturally, without me having to be the bad guy who demanded she stop seeing her instructor. "I know it's only been a few weeks, but I thought we had something special," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The way you look at me when we dance, the things you've said about my potential. I thought you felt it too." My stomach dropped. She was confessing feelings to him. On the phone, while I stood in our shared apartment holding groceries for the dinner I'd planned to cook for us. The woman I'd been planning to spend my life with was telling another man that she thought they had something special. "Please don't say it was just professional," Emma continued, standing up and pacing toward the window. "I know you felt the connection too, the way you touch me when we dance. It's not just instruction, Marcus. We both know that." Groceries down as quietly as possible and backed toward the door. I needed air. I needed space to process what I'd just heard. But as I turned to leave, Emma spotted me. "Jake," she said, pulling the phone away from her ear. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: shock, guilt, defiance, and finally settling on something that looked almost like relief. She said something quick to Marcus and hung up the phone. "We need to talk," she said, but there was no apology in her voice. If anything, she sounded annoyed that I'd interrupted her private conversation. Yes, we do. I walked into the living room, my legs feeling unsteady. Emma, what the hell was that phone call? She crossed her arms defensively. Marcus got offered a job opportunity in Seattle. He's leaving next week. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Just told him you thought you had something special. You were practically begging him not to leave. Emma's jaw tightened. You're taking it out of context. What context makes it okay for my fiancé to tell another man that she thinks they have a connection? What context makes it acceptable for you to say he touches you in ways that aren't? Just professional? God, Jake, you're so dramatic. Emma threw her hands up in exasperation. Yes, Marcus and I have developed a rapport. That's what happens when you work closely with someone on something artistic and physical. It doesn't mean anything beyond that. Doesn't mean anything. I stared at her in disbelief. Emma, you were crying. You were devastated that he's leaving. When was the last time you showed that much emotion about anything involving me? The question hung in the air between us, and I watched Emma's expression shift as she realized she couldn't answer it. When was the last time she'd been excited to see me come home from work? When was the last time she'd touched me with the kind of reverence she showed when Marcus guided her through a dance move? That's different, she said finally. Wait. Marcus understands my artistic side. He sees potential in me that other people don't. Other people, including me, you mean? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I sat down heavily on the couch, feeling suddenly exhausted. Emma, do you even want to marry me anymore? The pause before her answer told me everything I needed to know, but I waited anyway, hoping against hope that she'd reassure me. She'd tell me I was being ridiculous and paranoid. Instead, she said, I don't know. Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been prepared for denials, for anger, for accusations that I was overreacting. I wasn't prepared for honesty. You don't know? I repeated slowly. Jake, we've been together for 3 years. And I feel like we've been on autopilot for the last year. We go through the motions of being a couple, but there's no passion, no excitement. When I'm with Marcus, I feel alive again. I feel beautiful and graceful and desired, and you don't feel any of those things with me. Emma looked away. Not that simple. Actually, it is that simple. Either you want to marry me, or you don't. Either you love me, or you love someone else. I care about you, Jake. I do. But caring isn't the same as being in love, is it? And lately, I've been wondering if what we have is enough to build a marriage on. I felt something inside me crack open, a wound I hadn't even realized was there. So, the dance lessons weren't about improving our wedding. They were about you figuring out if you wanted to go through with the wedding at all. Maybe subconsciously, yes. Emma's voice was soft now, almost gentle. Marcus made me realize what I've been missing, the chemistry, the spark, the feeling of being truly seen and appreciated. And I don't make you feel any of those things. Jake, you're a good man. You're stable and reliable and kind. But you don't challenge me. You don't push me to be better or try new things. You're content with ordinary, and I'm starting to realize that maybe I'm not. Each word was like a small cut, precise and devastating. I thought about all the times I'd chosen a quiet night in over going out, all the times I'd suggested the same familiar restaurants instead of trying somewhere new. I thought about how I'd stopped planning surprises or romantic gestures somewhere along the way, assuming that our love was solid enough to sustain itself without constant effort. So what happens now? I asked. Marcus is leaving for Seattle. Are you going with him? He hasn't asked me to. The pain in her voice when she said this was unmistakable. She wanted him to ask. She wanted him to choose her the way she'd chosen him over me. But you would if he did. Emma met my eyes for the first time since the conversation started. I think I would. Yes. The apartment felt like it was shrinking around us. This space where we'd planned our future together, where we'd talked about children and decorating, ideas and growing old together. All of it suddenly felt like a lie, a performance we'd been giving without realizing we'd lost the audience. I think you should stay at Zoe's tonight, Emma said quietly. Both need time to think about what we want. Zoe, my friend Zoe, who had been warning me for weeks that something was off about Emma's behavior. Zoe, who had questioned why I wasn't involved in my own wedding dance lessons. Zoe, who had seen what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. What about the wedding? I asked, though even as I said it, I knew how absurd the question was. Jake, let's be realistic. After what? I just told you. Do you really want to marry someone who's in love with another man? The thing was, part of me did. Part of me wanted to fight for her, to convince her that what she felt for Marcus was just infatuation, that what we had was real and lasting and worth preserving. But a larger part of me, the part that had been quietly eroding over months of feeling invisible and inadequate, knew that she was right. I couldn't marry someone who looked at me the way Emma had been looking at me lately. Like I was a comfortable piece of furniture she'd grown tired of but hadn't gotten around to replacing. I couldn't stand at an altar and promise to love and cherish someone who had already mentally moved on to someone else. You're right, I said, standing up from the couch. I don't want to marry someone who wishes I was somebody else. Eyes filled with tears again, but I could tell they weren't really for me. They were for the situation, for the mess we'd created, for the life she'd have to rebuild. But they weren't for losing me specifically. Jake, I'm sorry. Never meant for any of this to happen. Yes, you did. The clarity that came with finally accepting the truth was almost liberating. Maybe not consciously, but you chose this. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't good enough, every time you compared me to him, every time you lit up for him in ways you never did for me, you chose this. I went to our bedroom and packed a bag, moving through the space mechanically. Emma stayed in the living room, and I could hear her on the phone again, probably calling Marcus to tell him about our conversation. The thought should have made me angry, but instead, I felt strangely empty. As I was zipping up my overnight bag, I caught sight of myself in the dresser mirror. I looked tired, defeated, smaller somehow than I remembered. When had I become this person? When had I accepted being treated as less than? When had I stopped believing I deserved someone who was excited to be with me? Jake, Emma appeared in the doorway as I shouldered my bag. What? I really am sorry. You deserve someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Right, I said. I do. Walking out of that apartment was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but also strangely freeing. For months, I'd been clinging to a relationship that was already over, trying to force life into something that had died from neglect and indifference. Now, standing on the sidewalk outside our building with my bag in hand, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in ages. Zoe took one look at me when she opened her apartment door and pulled me into a hug. Finally, she said simply, I was wondering when you were going to stop torturing yourself. She's in love with Marcus, I told her as she led me to her couch and handed me a beer. I know. I've been trying to tell you that for weeks. Why didn't I see it sooner? Because you didn't want to. It's because admitting it meant admitting that the life you'd planned was over. Zoe sat down across from me, her expression sympathetic but honest. Jake, you've been diminishing yourself for months, trying to be whatever you thought Emma wanted instead of being who you actually are. Maybe who I actually am isn't enough for Emma. You're right, it's not. But Emma isn't the measure of your worth, and her inability to appreciate what she had doesn't say anything about your value as a person. That night, lying on Zoe's couch and staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life wondering what was wrong with me that Emma chose someone else. I wasn't going to shrink myself down to fit into relationships with people who saw me as a backup plan. I was going to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else wanted. And then I was going to become the best version of that person, not for Emma or any other woman, but for myself. The text from Emma came 2 days later. Marcus had asked her to come to Seattle with him. She was leaving Portland in a week. The wedding was obviously off. She hoped I could understand, and that someday we could be friends. I deleted the message without responding. Emma had made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. The first thing I did after Emma left for Seattle was quit my job at the accounting firm. My supervisor, Mr. Henderson, looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I handed in my 2 weeks' notice without another position lined up. Jake, you've been here for 4 years, he said, adjusting his thick glasses. You're up for promotion? To senior accountant next quarter? Are you sure this is wise? I looked around the gray cubicle that had been my prison for the better part of my 20s. At the motivational posters on the walls and the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The truth was, I had no idea what I was going to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't spend another day in that office doing work that bored me senseless for people who barely knew my name. A Moz. Rejection had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. I'd been sleepwalking through my own life, accepting mediocrity in every area because it felt safe. Zoe thought I was having a breakdown. "Jake, you can't just throw away your career because Emma hurt you," she said over coffee at our usual spot on Hawthorne. "That's letting her win." "This isn't about Emma," I insisted, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "This is about me finally admitting that I hate my life and doing something about it." "Okay, but what are you going to do for money? How are you going to pay rent?" Those were valid questions that I didn't have good answers for. My savings would last me maybe 3 months if I was careful. After that, I'd need to figure something out. But for the first time in years, the uncertainty felt exciting rather than terrifying. I spent the first week of my unemployment doing absolutely nothing productive. I slept until noon, ordered takeout for every meal, and binge-watched Netflix shows that Emma had always refused to watch with me. It was gloriously irresponsible and exactly what I needed to clear my head. It was during this week of intentional laziness that I stumbled across the YouTube video that changed everything. I'd been mindlessly scrolling through dance videos, torturing myself by watching couples perform the kind of routines Emma and Marcus had been working on, when I came across a channel called Transform Through Movement. The instructor was a woman named Lily Chen, and she was unlike any dance teacher I'd ever seen. Where Marcus had been all smooth confidence and calculated charm, Lily was raw energy and genuine passion. She moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy physics, but more importantly, she talked about dance as a form of personal transformation rather than just entertainment. "Dance isn't about impressing other people," she said in one video, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun as she demonstrated a complex sequence. "It's about finding your authentic self through movement. It's about discovering strength you didn't know you had and expressing emotions you've been holding back." I watched every video on her channel that night, completely mesmerized. Taught everything from contemporary to ballroom to hip-hop. But her underlying message was always the same. Dance could be a tool for rebuilding yourself from the ground up. At the end of her most recent video, she mentioned that she taught at a studio in Los Angeles and was always looking for dedicated students who wanted to take their training seriously. She gave the studio address and encouraged people to reach out if they were interested in intensive programs. Los Angeles. It might as well have been another planet from my safe, predictable life in Portland. But sitting there in my pajamas at 2 in the morning, watching this woman move like poetry in motion, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Genuine inspiration. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could about Lily and her studio. Rhythm and Soul Dance Academy was located in West Hollywood and offered everything from beginner classes to professional training programs. The reviews were incredible, with student after student talking about how Lily had helped them find confidence, healed from trauma, and discover parts of themselves they never knew existed. The intensive program she mentioned in her videos, it's a 4-month immersive experience designed for serious students who wanted to completely transform their relationship with movement and their bodies. It was expensive, probably more than I should spend given my current unemployment status, but something about it called to me. On Thursday morning, I called the studio. Rhythm and Soul Academy. This is Diana speaking. "Hi, I'm calling about your intensive program. I saw Lily's videos online, and I'm interested in learning more." "Absolutely. Are you located in LA?" "No, I'm in Portland, but I'm willing to relocate for the program." There was a pause. "That's quite a commitment for someone we haven't met. Do you have any dance experience?" I thought about my clumsy attempts to keep up with Emma and Marcus's choreography. It's very little, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else in the program if you'll give me a chance. "Well, Lily does love students who come in with passion rather than just technique. Tell you what, why don't you send us a video of yourself talking about why you want to do this program? Nothing fancy, just you explaining your motivation. If Lily thinks you'd be a good fit, we can set up a video call." I spent the entire day working on that video, recording myself over and over until I had something that felt honest without being pathetic. I talked about feeling lost, about wanting to discover who I was outside of other people's expectations, about being inspired by Lily's philosophy that dance could be transformative rather than just performative. 3 days later, Diana called me back. "Lily watched your video," she said. "She wants to talk to you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific time." The video call with Lily was unlike any conversation I'd ever had about dance. She didn't ask about my technical background or my previous training. Instead, she wanted to know about my fears, my goals, and what I hoped to discover about myself through movement. "Jake," she said, her voice coming through my laptop speakers with surprising warmth, "I can see that you're at a crossroads in your life. Dance has a way of forcing us to confront everything we've been avoiding about ourselves. Are you ready for that kind of honesty?" "I think so," I said. "I know I can't keep living the way I have been." "The intensive program isn't just about learning steps," she continued. "It's about completely rewiring your relationship with your body, your confidence, and your sense of self-worth. Students often find it emotionally challenging as well as physically demanding." "I need challenging," I admitted. "I've been playing. It's safe my entire life, and it's gotten me nowhere." Lily smiled, and I could see why her students were so devoted to her. There was something genuinely caring in her expression, but also a strength that suggested she wouldn't accept excuses or half-hearted effort. "All right," she said. "You're serious about this? I have 1 spot left in the program starting next month, but I need you to understand that this isn't a hobby or a fun distraction. This is 4 months of your life dedicated to complete transformation. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Emma dancing with Marcus, about my gray cubicle at the accounting firm, about all the years I'd spent making myself smaller to fit into other people's visions of who I should be. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." 2 weeks later, I was loading my car with everything I owned and driving south toward Los Angeles. Zoe had tried one last time to talk me out of it when she came to see me off. "Hey, Jake, I admire what you're doing. I really do. But are you sure you're not just running away from your problems?" "Maybe I am," I acknowledged. "But sometimes running away is the first step running toward something better." The drive to LA took 12 hours, and with each mile I felt like I was shedding pieces of my old life. By the time I reached the city limits, I was no longer Jake, the mediocre accountant who'd been dumped by his fiancée for her dance instructor. I was just Jake, starting over in a city where nobody knew my story or my failures. I'd found a tiny studio apartment in West Hollywood, walking distance from the dance academy. It was expensive and barely big enough for a bed and a small kitchenette, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I was living in a space that reflected my choices rather than compromises I'd made for someone else's comfort. On my first day at the academy, I arrived an hour early, too nervous to be late. The building was modern and sleek, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the studios with natural light. I could hear music coming from various rooms and see dancers of all levels working through routines. Lily greeted me in the main studio, wearing black leggings and a tank top that revealed arms sculpted by years of dance training. In person, she was even more striking than she'd appeared in her videos, but what struck me most was her presence. She commanded attention without seeming to try. "Welcome to your new life, Jake," she said with a grin. "Ready to find out what you're really made of?" I looked around the studio, the mirrors that would reflect back every mistake and every improvement. At the bars where I'd push my body beyond its current limitations. At the space where I'd either transform into someone I could respect or crash and burn spectacularly. "Let's do this," I said.
Oh.
The next 4 months would test every assumption I'd ever had about my capabilities, my strength, and my worth. Standing there in that bright studio with Lily's challenge hanging in the air, I felt more alive than I had in years. The first week nearly broke me. I'd thought I was reasonably fit, but Lily's intensive program revealed just how delusional that belief had been. My body screamed in protest as she put us through warm-ups that felt more like marathon training, followed by technique work that demanded flexibility I didn't possess and strength I'd never developed. "Your body is holding years of tension and self-doubt," Lily explained after watching me struggle through a basic contemporary sequence. Before we can teach it to move with grace, we need to teach it to trust itself again. The other students in the program were intimidatingly talented. There was Sophia, a former ballerina who moved like liquid silk, but was recovering from an eating disorder that had ended her professional career. Marcus. Not to be confused with the other Marcus Hood. Stolen My Fiancée was a hip-hop dancer from Chicago who could make his body do things that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Alina was a Broadway performer, taking a break to rediscover her love for movement after years of grueling auditions had left her burned out and cynical. And then there was me, the accountant from Portland, who could barely touch his toes and had never performed in front of anyone more intimidating than a wedding reception DJ. Don't compare yourself to the others, Lily told me after my third day of feeling completely out of my depth. They're here to refine skills they already have. You're here to discover abilities you never knew existed. Those are very different journeys. She was right, but that didn't make the daily humiliation any easier to bear. While the others flowed through complex combinations with practiced ease, I struggled with basic concepts like weight transfer and spatial awareness. My reflection in the studio mirror showed a man who looked awkward and uncertain, moving through space like he was apologizing for taking up room. Stop thinking so much, Lily would call out during our sessions. Dance isn't a math problem, Jake. You can't solve it with your head. You have to feel it in your body. But feeling had always been my weakness. I'd spent so many years intellectualizing my emotions, processing everything through layers of analysis and self-doubt, that I'd lost touch with my instincts. When Lily asked us to move in response to music without thinking about technique, I froze. When she encouraged us to express anger or joy or grief through movement, I felt like a fraud. The breakthrough came during our 4th week in the most unexpected way possible. We were working on a piece about vulnerability, and Lily had asked each of us to create a solo that represented a moment when we'd felt completely exposed and helpless. I'd been avoiding the assignment for days, claiming I needed more time to work on technique before attempting choreography. But that Thursday evening, when the studio was mostly empty and I thought I was alone, I finally let myself explore what that vulnerability felt like in my body. I started by just standing in the center of the room, remembering the night I'd overheard Emma telling Marcus that she thought they had something special. I let myself feel the full weight of that moment, the way my chest had clenched and my vision had tunneled. Then I began to move. Wasn't pretty or technically proficient. I dropped to the floor like I'd been punched, curled in on myself, then slowly fought my way back to standing. I moved like someone drowning, reaching for help that never came. Now I collapsed again, then forced myself up with trembling muscles. Over and over, each time getting a little stronger, a little more determined. I didn't realize Lily had been watching until I heard her voice from the doorway. That, she said quietly, was the first time I've seen you actually dance. I turned toward her, embarrassed to be caught in such a raw moment. It was sloppy. My technique was terrible. Your technique was irrelevant. You moved from truth, and truth is always beautiful, even when it hurts to watch. She walked into the studio and sat cross-legged on the floor. Tell me about her. I didn't ask how she knew it was about a woman. Lily had a way of seeing straight through whatever walls people tried to build. So I told her about Emma, about feeling invisible. In my own relationship, about watching the woman I loved fall for someone who represented everything I wasn't. And you believed her assessment of your worth, Lily said when I finished? It wasn't a question. She wasn't wrong. Because was everything I'm not. Confident, charismatic, physically impressive. He made her feel beautiful and desired. I made her feel safe, comfortable, taken for granted. I nodded. Jake, do you know what I see when I look at you dance? I shook my head. I see someone who feels everything deeply but has never learned how to let that intensity show. You move like you're afraid of taking up space, like you're apologizing for existing. But when you let yourself be vulnerable just now, you filled this entire room with your presence. Over the following weeks, Lily worked with me to find that presence again and again. She pushed me to explore anger, to move with aggression and power, instead of constantly apologizing for my space. She taught me to use my height, which I'd always seen as awkward, as an advantage that could create dramatic lines and commanding presence. Your ex-fiancée was wrong about one thing. She told me during a particularly intense session where I'd finally managed to execute a complex lift sequence with Alina. You're not lacking in passion. You've just been taught to hide it so well that you forgot it was there. The physical transformation was remarkable, but the mental shift was even more dramatic. Hours of daily training had reshaped my body, adding muscle definition I'd never possessed and flexibility that made everyday movement feel effortless. But more importantly, I was learning to inhabit my body with confidence instead of shame. Lily introduced new challenges constantly. Contemporary dance one day, ballroom the next, followed by jazz, and even some hip-hop fundamentals. Each style demanded different qualities, but they all required the same fundamental shift in mindset, from apologetic to intentional, from hesitant to committed. The best dancers aren't necessarily the most technically perfect, Lily explained during our 8th week. They're the ones who make choices and commit to them completely. Tentative perfection is always less compelling than confident imperfection. I started applying this philosophy beyond the studio as well. I tried restaurants I'd never heard of, struck up conversations with strangers, explored parts of Los Angeles that the old Jake would have found too intimidating or unfamiliar. Small act of boldness, built on the last, creating a momentum that felt intoxicating. The other students began treating me differently too. Where they'd initially been polite but dismissive, viewing me as the amateur who didn't belong, they started seeking out my perspective and including me in their post-class discussions about technique and artistry. You know what's crazy? Sophia said one evening, as we all grabbed dinner together after a particularly grueling session. When you first got here, I thought Lily was making a mistake accepting someone with no background. But watching you work, seeing how you approach every challenge like it's the most important thing in the world, it's actually inspiring, Marcus nodded in agreement. You make all of us work harder because you never give less than everything you have. That's rare, even among professionals. Alina, who'd been the most skeptical of my presence initially, surprised me most of all. I've been dancing since I was 5, she said, and I've gotten so caught up in technique and perfection that I forgot why I started. Watching you discover movement for the first time reminds me of what it felt like when dance was pure joy instead of constant judgment. Their acceptance felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a community that valued growth over achievement, effort over natural talent. These people saw me struggling and celebrated my progress, instead of dismissing my limitations. By the 10th week, Lily began incorporating partner work into our training. This was where my old anxieties threatened to resurface. Partner dancing had been the source of my greatest humiliation with Emma and Marcus, the arena where my inadequacies had been most visible. I want you working with Alina today, Lily announced, and I felt my stomach clench with familiar dread. But Alina approached the partnership differently than Emma ever had. Where Emma had grown tense and critical whenever I made mistakes, Alina treated errors as information rather than failures. Try leading with your whole body, not just your arms, she suggested when I struggled with a turn sequence. I can't. Follow what you're not fully committing to. When I still fumbled the movement, she didn't sigh or roll her eyes. Instead, she broke it down into smaller components, helping me understand not just what to do, but why it worked. Leading isn't about being perfect, she explained. It's about being clear in your intention and confident in your choices. I'd rather follow someone who makes a definitive mistake than someone who's tentative about doing the right thing. Working with Alina taught me that partnership could be collaborative rather than evaluative. We were solving problems together instead of her judging my performance. When we finally nailed the sequence we'd been working on, her smile was genuine and celebratory rather than relieved that I'd finally gotten it right. You're a natural leader when you trust yourself, she told me afterward. You have this quiet strength that makes me feel safe to take risks. The comment stunned me. Ma had always made me feel like my quieter nature was a weakness, something that made me boring and unappealing. But Alina saw it as a strength, a quality that enhanced rather than diminished our partnership. During our 11th week, Lily announced that the program would culminate in a showcase performance where each student would present a solo piece, and participate in a group number. The thought of performing in front of an audience made my palms sweat, but there was also an excitement there that surprised me. Your solo should represent who you've become through this process, Lily explained. Not who you were when you started, but who you are now. I spent hours working on my piece, drawing from everything I'd learned about using movement to express authentic emotion. Of someone breaking free from the constraints they'd accepted and discovering strength they didn't know they possessed. The music I chose built slowly, starting with tentative, questioning phrases that mirrored my early weeks in the program, then growing into powerful, confident statements that reflected the man I was becoming. The choreography incorporated elements from all the styles we'd studied, but the through line was unmistakably mine. It's beautiful, Lily said after I showed her a run-through. You found your voice as a mover, Jake. This piece could only come from you. The showcase was scheduled for a Friday evening, and Lily had invited industry professionals, former students, and family members of current participants. As the day approached, I realized I wanted someone there who knew the old me, someone who could witness the transformation firsthand. I called Zoe. Jake, oh my God, it's so good to hear from you, she said when she picked up. How's the dance thing going? Please tell me you haven't joined a cult. I laughed. No cult. But Zoe, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to fly down here this weekend? There's a performance, and I really want you to see what I've been working on. There was a pause. Jake, you want me to fly to Los Angeles to watch you dance? I know it sounds crazy. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it. The Jake I know considers walking to the mailbox sufficient exercise for the day. That's exactly why I need you to see this. I need someone who knew who I was to witness who I've become. Something in my voice must have convinced her because she agreed to book a flight. The night of the showcase, I stood backstage listening to the murmur of the audience and feeling a familiar cocktail of nerves and excitement. But this time, the anxiety was different. Instead of fear of judgment, it was anticipation of sharing something I'd worked hard to create. Lily found me during warm-ups and placed a hand on my shoulder. However this goes tonight, I want you to know that you've already succeeded. You came here broken and convinced you weren't capable of growth. You're leaving here as someone who knows his own strength. Thank you, I said, and meant it completely. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. I didn't see anything that wasn't already there, Jake. I just helped you find it. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage with steady steps. The lights were bright enough that I couldn't see individual faces in the audience, but I knew Zoe was out there somewhere. She's probably still in shock that her friend, the accountant, was about to perform contemporary dance. The music began, and I let myself sink into the movement. For 4 minutes, I told the story of my transformation through my body, using every technique Lily had taught me and every emotion I'd processed over the past months. I moved like someone who belonged in his own skin, who took up space unapologetically, who had something valuable to offer the world. When the music ended, and I held my final pose, the silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then the applause began, and it was thunderous. I straightened up and took my bow, finally able to see the audience. People were on their feet, and in the third row, I spotted Zoe with tears streaming down her face. After the show, she was one of the first people to reach me backstage. Jake, she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. I don't even know what to say. That was incredible. You're incredible? Did I look different up there? Different. Jake, you look like a completely different person. You moved with such confidence, such strength. I kept looking for the shy, uncertain guy I've known for years, but he wasn't there. Other audience members approached throughout the evening, many of them asking about my background and training. When I mentioned that I'd only been dancing for 4 months, their reactions ranged from disbelief to amazement. You have a natural gift, one woman said. She introduced herself as a talent scout for a major dance company. Have you considered pursuing this professionally? The question would have seemed absurd for months earlier. Now it felt like a possibility worth exploring. Lily approached as the evening was winding down, her smile proud and knowing. So what's next for you, Jake? I looked around the studio that had become my second home, at the people who'd become my chosen family. at the mirrors that now reflected back someone I actually recognized and respected. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But for the first time in my life, that feels exciting instead of terrifying." "Diana and I have been talking," Lily said. "We're expanding the academy, opening a new location in Portland. We need someone to help run the program there, someone who understands what it's like to start from nothing and build something beautiful." My heart stopped. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership. You could teach, help develop curriculum, share your story with students who need to hear that transformation is possible at any age." The offer was everything I'd never dared to dream about, a chance to build a career around something I was passionate about while helping others discover their own strength. "There's just one thing," I said. "I need to go back to Portland first. There are some things I need to take care of before I can move forward." Lily smiled knowingly. "I figured there might be. Take the time you need. The opportunity will be here when you're ready." As I packed my belongings in the tiny West Hollywood apartment that had been my cocoon during this transformation, I felt ready to face whatever waited for me back home. I was no longer the man who'd been discarded and dismissed. I was someone who knew his own worth, who could command a room and inspire others. Most importantly, I was someone who was finally excited to see what came next. The flight back to Portland felt surreal as the plane descended through the familiar gray clouds that perpetually hung over the city. I caught my reflection in the small window and barely recognized the man staring back. For months in Los Angeles had changed more than just my body, though the physical transformation was undeniable. My shoulders sat differently now, broader and more confident. My posture spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin. My eyes that showed the biggest change. Where there used to be uncertainty and apology, there was now a calm assurance. Zoe picked me up from the airport, and during the drive to her apartment, she kept stealing glances at me like she couldn't quite believe I was real. "You even walk differently," she said, as we carried my bags up to her place. "There's this presence about you now, like, something the rest of us don't." "Maybe I do," I said, settling onto her familiar couch. "I know who I am now, something I never had before." "So what's the plan? Are you taking Lily's job offer? Eventually? But first, I need to see how things stand here. There are conversations I need to have, people I need to face." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me you're not planning to go crawling back to Emma." "The opposite, actually. I'm planning to show her exactly what she gave up." The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. 3 days after my return, Zoe mentioned that she'd run into Rachel, Emma's former maid of honor, at a coffee shop downtown. According to Rachel, Emma had returned from Seattle just 2 weeks ago, her relationship with Marcus having imploded spectacularly. Apparently he cheated on her with his new business partner after only 6 weeks, Zoe reported with barely concealed satisfaction. Emma came back with her tail between her legs and has been trying to rebuild her life here. Rachel said she's been asking about you, wondering if you're still in town. The old Jake might have felt vindicated by this news, or perhaps even sympathetic to Emma's situation. The new Jake felt nothing but mild curiosity about someone who'd once been important but was now simply part of his past. "Where's she working now?" I asked. "Same marketing firm, apparently. But Rachel says she's miserable. The company's been struggling and there have been layoffs. Emma's barely hanging on to her position." I filed this information away and focused on more important matters. Lily had connected me with a real estate agent in Portland who specialized in commercial properties suitable for dance studios. I spent the next week touring potential locations, envisioning how each space could be transformed into the kind of welcoming, transformative environment that Rhythm and Soul Academy had been for me. The third location we visited was perfect. Former warehouse in the Pearl District with soaring ceilings, excellent natural light, and enough square footage for multiple studios. The space had character, with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors that would be ideal for dance. "The owner is motivated to rent quickly," the agent explained as we walked through the main floor. "The previous tenant moved out last month, and he's offering favorable terms for the right business." I could already see it, mirrors along the eastern wall to catch the morning light. A reception area where students could gather before and after classes, smaller studios for private lessons and workshops. This would be where I'd help other people discover what I'd found in Los Angeles. I'll take it, I said, surprising both the agent and myself with the speed of my decision. Don't you want to discuss terms? See other properties? No, this is the one. That evening, I called Lily to tell her about the space and confirm that I was ready to move forward with the partnership. Her excitement was infectious, and we spent an hour on the phone discussing curriculum, staffing, and the timeline for opening. I'm so proud of you, Jake, she said before we hung up. You're about to create something beautiful. 2 weeks later, as I was meeting with contractors about studio renovations, I received a text from an unknown number. Jake, this is Emma. I heard you're back in town. Could we talk? Owe you an apology? I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling nothing but mild annoyance at the interruption to my day. The woman who'd once had the power to devastate me with a single word was now just another contact in my phone. I typed back, I'm pretty busy with my new business. What did you need? Her response came quickly. Please, Jake. Just coffee. 1 hour. There are things I need to say. Part of me wanted to ignore her entirely, but I realized that this conversation might be necessary for my own closure. Besides, I was curious to see how she'd react to the man I'd become. Fine. Stumptown on Division. Tomorrow at 2 p.m.
I
Arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window where the afternoon light would be flattering. Not that I needed the help anymore, but old habits died hard. When Emma walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident woman who dismissed me as beneath her standards. This Emma looked tired, stressed, and older than her years. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a wrinkled blazer over jeans that had seen better days, but it was her posture that told the real story. She moved like someone who'd been beaten down by life, shoulders curved inward defensively. She spotted me and froze, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. I'd dressed carefully for this meeting, choosing clothes that highlighted the changes in my physique while maintaining an air of casual confidence. A fitted Henley that showed off my improved posture and newly defined arms, dark jeans that emphasized my height, and boots that added an extra inch to my already commanding presence. Jake, she said uncertainly, approaching the table like she wasn't sure she had the right person. Hello, Emma, stood to greet her, noting how she had to look, up to meet my eyes in a way that felt significant. You look different. She seemed unsettled, brushing a hand through her hair. You look amazing, really. Have you been working out? Something like that. Want a coffee? I asked, heading to the counter to grab her usual latte. Even as I walked away, I could feel her eyes following me. When I returned, she was still staring, brow furrowed. I don't get it, she said as I sat down. What happened to you? You seem like a completely different person. I just became the person I was supposed to be. It took me a while to figure that out. Emma wrapped her hands around the coffee like she was trying to absorb some warmth from it. Jake, I owe you an apology. The way things ended. I handled it horribly. That's on me. Okay. Apology accepted. She blinked, caught off guard. That's it? What else do you want me to say? You apologized, I acknowledged. Was there something more? Just thought we could talk. About what happened. About us. There is no us, Emma. Hasn't been for a long time. I know, she said quietly. I just hoped maybe we could still be friends. I miss talking to you. I studied her face. She was trying to hide it, but there was a quiet desperation there. How are things with Marcus? Her expression faltered. That ended. It was a mistake. He wasn't who I thought he was. See. So now that option didn't work out? You're here to see if I'm still on standby? It's not. Like that, she said quickly, but the color rising in her face told a different story. Then what is it like? She hesitated, clearly unprepared for the role reversal. She wasn't used to being the one off balance, the one trying to earn a second chance. Since I've been back, I've been thinking about us. About what? We had before things fell apart. I know I hurt you, Jake, but can't we find a way back to that? No, we can't. Why not? You loved me. You can't just turn that off. You're right. I didn't just stop feeling. But Realized those feelings weren't for the real youth. They were for who I thought you were. For who I hoped you could be. She frowned. What does that mean? I fell in love with a version of you that only existed in my head. I believed in what we could be. But the real youth, the one sitting across from me now, is someone who discarded me like I didn't matter. You made me feel small because it made you feel important. You chose someone else without hesitation. I was confused, she said quietly. I didn't know what I wanted. No, I replied. You did know. You wanted someone exciting, someone who checked all the boxes you thought mattered. I wasn't that person, at least. Not then. And now you are. I smiled. Her reaction told me she wasn't used to seeing that kind of confidence in me. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I know who I am now. I know what I bring to the table. She stared at me like she was trying to connect the man in front of her with the version of me she remembered. You're seeing someone, she said suddenly. That's why you're acting like this. You've moved on. In a sense, yes. I've moved on to a place where I no longer define myself through someone else's approval. But is there someone else? The question said more about her than anything else could have. Emma lived in a world where worth was measured through relationships, where being alone meant being less. Maybe, I said, thinking of Diana, her intelligence, her sense of purpose, the way our connection was grounded in something deeper than need. Emma reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. Jake, please, can't we try again? I know I screwed up, but I'm willing to fight for this. I looked at her hand on mine. Once her touch would have lit something in me. It felt like nothing. Just contact. Just skin. Emma, what do you think's changed here? You left because I wasn't impressive enough, not confident, not successful. You chased after someone who fit the version of life you thought you wanted. That failed, and now you're here, trying to repackage the past as something worth revisiting. That's not fair, she whispered. People grow. Priorities change. They do. I did. But you're offering me the same dynamic we had before? It wouldn't be like that, wouldn't it? Emma, look at yourself right now. You're trying to convince me to take you back by appealing to my old insecurities, by suggesting that this might be my only chance at love, by acting like you're doing me a favor by considering me again. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, realizing I was right. The man you knew before might have jumped at this opportunity, I continued. He might have convinced himself that you're coming back. Meant he'd been worthy all along. But I know better now. I know the difference between someone who chooses me because they see my value and someone who settles for me because their better options didn't pan out. Emma's eyes filled with tears. So, that's it? You're just going to dismiss everything we had together. I'm going to honor what we had by not trying to resurrect something that was never healthy to begin with. I stood up from the table, noting how she had to crane her neck to look up at me now. The physical metaphor wasn't lost on either of us. Jake, wait, can I ask you something? I paused. You happy? Really happy? For the first time since? She'd walked into the coffee shop. Her question seemed genuine rather than manipulative. Yes, I said. For the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely happy. I wake up excited about my day. I have work that fulfills me, relationships that energize me, and most importantly, I have respect for myself. I never made you happy. You made me feel needed, which I mistook for happiness. But needing someone and choosing someone are very different things. She nodded slowly, finally seeming to understand that this conversation was really over. I hope things work out for you, Emma. I really do. They're going to have to work out without me. I left her sitting at the table and walked out into the Portland afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. That chapter of my life was finally, definitively closed. 3 months later, Rhythm and Soul Portland held its grand opening. Studio was everything I'd envisioned and more. Diana had flown up from Los Angeles to help with the launch, and seeing the space filled with eager students of all ages and backgrounds felt like the culmination of a journey I'd never expected to take. You should be proud, Diana said, as we watched our first group class warm up. This is already everything Lily hoped it would be. I looked around the studio at the teenagers discovering confidence through hip-hop. at the middle-aged women reclaiming their bodies through contemporary movement, at the older gentleman who'd always wanted to learn ballroom, but had never found the courage until now. Psh, it's better than I dreamed, I admitted. Diana smiled and moved closer, her hand finding mine. Over the past few months, our professional partnership had evolved into something deeper, built on genuine admiration and shared purpose rather than desperation or convenience. There's something I need to tell you, she said.
Lily's been getting calls from people who want to replicate this model in other cities. There's talk of expanding nationwide.
That's incredible. She wants you to spearhead the expansion.
You'd be traveling, consulting, helping other people create their own transformation spaces. The opportunity was staggering. A year ago, I'd been a failed accountant whose fiancée had left him for her dance instructor. Now, I was being offered the chance to build a nationwide network of studios, dedicated to helping people discover their own strength. What do you think? Diana asked. Before I could answer, I noticed a familiar figure standing outside the studios. Front windows. Emma was there, watching the class through the glass, with an expression I couldn't quite read. She looked better than she had at the coffee shop, more put together, but there was something wistful in her posture. Diana followed my gaze. Is that her? Yeah. She looked sad. She made her choices. We watched as Emma stood there for a few more minutes, then turned and walked away. I felt a brief moment of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. So, Diana prompted, the expansion opportunity? I looked around the studio again at the life I'd built from nothing, at the community I'd helped create, at the woman beside me who saw me as an equal partner in something meaningful. Let's do it, I said. Let's help as many people as possible. Discover what they're really capable of. Diana's smile was radiant. I was hoping you'd say that. That evening, after the studio had closed and the last student had left, Diana and I sat in the main dance room with takeout containers spread between us on the floor. The mirrors reflected back to people who belonged in this space, who'd earned the right to call it home. Can I ask you something? Diana said. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emma hadn't left? If you'd gone through with the wedding? I considered the question seriously. I think I would have spent the rest of my life trying to be someone I wasn't, slowly disappearing until there was nothing left of the real me. And now I know that the right person doesn't require you to disappear. They help you become more yourself, not less. Diana leaned over and kissed me softly. For what it's worth, I think Emma's loss was the world's gain. You wouldn't be here helping all these people if you'd stayed in that life. Maybe not, but I don't need to give her credit for my transformation anymore. I did the work. I made the choice to change. Good, she said, because the man I'm falling in love with isn't defined by what someone else did to him. He's defined by what he chose to do next. Later that night, as I walked home through the Pearl District, I passed the coffee shop where Emma and I had our final conversation through the window. I could see couples having the same kinds of intense discussions that had once defined my relationship with her. Young people trying to figure out love and compatibility and whether they were settling or choosing wisely. I didn't envy them the journey ahead, but I was grateful that my own path had led me here, to this life I'd built deliberately rather than stumbled into by default. May had been right about one thing. I deserved someone who loved me the way I deserved to be loved. She just hadn't realized that someone might end up being me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.